last years of the 19th century, that human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds of space. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Few men even considered the possibility of life on other planets. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds immeasurably superior to ours regarded this Earth with envious eyes. And slowly and surely, they drew their plans against us.
Broadcasting live
from a tiny studio somewhere in North America.
This is Dark Matters Radio Live. And now I give you your host,
the Silverback of ufology.
Here's Don Ecker.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another brand new edition of Dark Matters Radio. And of course, Dark Matters Radio is brought to you courtesy of KGRA Radio, your contact point to the paranormal and places further out. Hey, tonight we have a very special show. As a matter of fact, in perfect openness, tonight's program, in fact, was a pre-record. We had to do that because of all the, the things that basically prevented us from being live tonight. So we talked to our illustrious producer, Bill Skywatcher. We got this all set up and off we are. Now, tonight's guest, I am very privileged to have him come on, is Dr. Michael P. Masters. Now, Dr. Masters is an anthropologist. As a matter of fact, he's a professor of biological anthropology at Montana Tech, all the way up in chilly Montana. And he received his PhD in anthropology originally from, actually back in my part of the country when I was from there, back at Ohio State University. Now, over the years, he's been involved in a lot of things, not the least of which is archaeological concerns. And actually, before we started recording this evening, we were having a somewhat spirited chat about, of all things, pre-diluvial historical questions and archaeology. And we just may go there again before this show is over. But originally, why I wanted to have Dr. Masters on is the book that he just recently wrote, Identified Flying Objects. And he has a rather interesting theory, which we're going to kick around. And that theory, in a nutshell, and of course he's going to explain it in great detail, but that theory in a nutshell is that perhaps some of those unknown UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, craft, and a lot of them are, in fact, by all appearances, craft of some type. What if they may be our future descendants coming back for a visit? And I want to find out what makes Dr. Masters think that, because I've got some questions for that thesis. Dr. Masters, it is a great privilege to have you on. Welcome to Dark Matters Radio.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate you having me on. Good to be here.
Okay, now let's jump actually right into the thesis of your book. And then I definitely want to hit some other areas with you. But right now, according to, and I, in complete disclosure, I have not read your book, but I believe I have the general gist of what you're suggesting. I've been in this field of research involving UAPs for a very long time. And what brought you to the conclusion that at least some of these, in fact, may be time travelers?
Well, it brings together a lot of sort of supporting arguments from a few major fields and then some more circumferential ones. But primarily, it looks at this phenomenon in the context of hominin evolution, specifically within the field of anthropology, biological anthropology, archaeology to some extent, but also ties in some arguments from physics, astronomy, and astrobiology. And yeah, as you mentioned, the main thesis is just that these extraterrestrial beings, these intelligent beings who are described in so many different reports of close encounters and contactee experiences, because the vast majority of them are described as having large round heads, big eyes, small noses, ears, small pointy chins, but yet they still have all of the same physical characteristics we have, most notably that they walk upright or bipedally, and that's the trait that defines our hominin lineage, our clade, which separates us from the other living great apes and a number of other extinct ones as well. So really, it started with looking at the physical form that's most commonly described, and then also looking at the craft themselves. And they have a number of qualities that, based in modern research in physics, would seem to indicate that they do have the function of traveling backward in time. So these craft themselves may be the time machine that's transporting our distant descendants who have the same traits that we have now, that we've evolved over the last 6 to 8 million years. And if you just fast forward these same trends that characterize hominin evolution, you're likely to have something that looks very much like them. So it just kind of ties that together, along with a lot of other supporting evidence from various fields.
Well, okay. Now, you've given me a number of areas to explore. First off, I've got to say this. In 1966, actually, it was in December in my home state of Pennsylvania. It was the first day of deer season. Now, back in those days, I hunted. As a matter of fact, the first day of deer season, Michael, was like Christmas, New Year's, and Easter all rolled up into one joyous holiday.
Yeah, it is here too.
Okay. So, even my high school at that time gave us the first day of deer season off. Mm-hmm. Now, I was with a number of friends from school, and we were hunting, and we were coming down off this, well, we called it a mountain back in those days. It wouldn't even make a decent hill out west now, but we were coming back looking for our cars, coming out of the woods. And as we were walking down the hill, and it must have been somewhere between 4 p.m., 4:15, it was getting very dark. One of my friends suddenly screamed. And, after first thinking, oh, the jackass saw a deer and now it's gone, it scared it off.
Yeah.
I turned around, looked at him, and his face was pointed at the sky. And as I looked up, there were 4 brilliant white lights, almost like arc lights, flying at a very leisurely pace. I would guesstimate they were going under a couple of 100 miles an hour. And as they overflew us, immediately the light in the rear, and incidentally, they were in a diamond formation, the light in the rear suddenly shot straight up into the sky like a missile taking off. And when that happened, the other 3, which now were in a V formation, suddenly hit a burst of speed. I have no idea how fast they took off from there. But my God, they were gone in a couple of seconds. Now, I got to say, there were 4 young guys there with our mouths hanging down around our knees. Now, that kind of, I guess you could say, put me on the track for the beginning of my investigation into this. Now, I got back from the Army in 1972. And I ended up a couple of years after that reading about a new book that was coming out by an author I was familiar with. Later, I was to become personal friends with him. But a fellow by the name of John Keel. Now, Keel had just several years previous to that been involved in a massive investigation involving that part of the country: Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, New Jersey, and New York. Because even though it was not widely known, there was a tremendous UFO flap going on for several years, which accumulated in creature reports emanating out of West Virginia. Are you familiar with the Mothman sightings of what appeared to be cryptoid creatures?
Yeah. I remember people talking about that when I lived back in the Midwest.
Right. Well, now that always, I got to say, that always fascinated me. And later, when I became actively involved in research in the 80s, I got to say that I did a rather intense historical study about that period of time. And there were a lot of cryptoid creatures that were being reported all throughout that area in Ohio, Pennsylvania, of course, West Virginia, also New Jersey and New York. Now, I want to come back to that in a minute. But as all this was going on, basically, and this I might add was a number of years after the Air Force closed their Project Blue Book files, there were a lot of people that were not satisfied with the official explanation. Now, when you're suggesting that these, in fact, may be, some of them at any rate, may be human descendants, first off, do you give credence to the fact that a lot of these reports of cryptoid creatures are somehow connected with the overall phenomena?
Yeah, I feel like it's just recently that people have kind of been coming around to that idea. I'm not a ufologist, but my sense is that they were kind of seen as separate things, and then recently there's been a little more broad-based acknowledgement that these cryptids are oftentimes seen in association with fast-moving lights and with actual craft. So, yeah, there could definitely be a connection there. I forget who I was talking to, but a while back we were even speculating that if these are time-traveling descendants, they might have gone back in time and picked up a Neanderthal or a Gigantopithecus and just kind of drop them in the woods from time to time to mess with us. And that's where Bigfoot came from. It was a tongue-in-cheek sort of thing. But if that is a possibility in the future, if we do have that technological capability, that's certainly something that we could do. In the book, I talk more about the reptilian and the insectoid type creatures who seem to deviate from the typical gray alien or humanoid alien that is so commonly reported. In looking at the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation, their free study, they found that the vast majority of contactees, over 3,000 of them, report seeing human-like individuals, humanoids, or sometimes just entirely humans that might have slightly more derived features with the bigger eyes. Some of them have hair still, blonde hair typically. You hear about the Nordics reported a lot, people with East Asian characteristics. So because those make up the bulk of these reports, I mostly focus on those, but I do also mention other cryptids, and specifically the reptilians and mantid insectoid-like creatures, and offer a possible explanation for that. Obviously, I can't know. Nobody knows who they are, what they are, where they come from, when they come from, potentially. But if we do continue to evolve the same way that we have throughout hominin evolution, we're likely to look like these grays and humanoids, as I mentioned. But it's very possible that in the distant future, we could evolve to the point where we're almost unrecognizable as humans. You could argue that even now, with these very human-like beings coming potentially from our future, we don't recognize their humanness, even though they share so many similarities with us. So if we're talking about millions of years in the future, we could evolve more insect or reptile-like traits, and these could still be us, or possibly an actual insect intelligent civilization, or reptilians that evolved intelligence and also acquired the possibility of backward time travel. So in that sense, if we're talking about a very distant future, it could help explain why some of these appear to be non-human, whereas most of them do seem to be much more like us.
Well, in the late 1970s, mid to latter 1970s, I discovered a book which I ended up purchasing, took home, started to read it. Was not necessarily an easy read, but it was fascinating. It fed into my love of historical research. Later, I was to become very close friends with the author after an appearance I made on Larry King Live in the late 80s, where I mentioned his book. His name was Zecharia Sitchin. The book was called The 12th Planet. Now, Sitchin was a Jew who originally emigrated from the former Soviet Union, grew up in Israel. His family emigrated to Israel. And this was in the early part of the century. This was prior to Israel becoming a nation once again. Later, he went to London, where he graduated from the, and I'm going from memory now, I believe it was the London School of Economics, but he was a linguist and purportedly was one of only a couple of hundred people that could read and understand, decipher ancient Sumerian. Now, Sumeria is and this will get into some of the archaeology, Michael. Sumeria is a fascinating topic that I find, well, somewhat beyond my ken, because here was a civilization that basically popped into existence roughly 6,000 years ago, seemingly out of nowhere. And when I say they popped into existence, I'm talking about basically with a fully formed understanding of the arts of civilization. Those arts included government, kingship, astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, animal husbandry, and other arts associated with a fully formed and functioning civilization. Now, when they talked about where they acquired their knowledge they attributed came from the gods, who they called Nephilim, those who from heaven to earth came. Now, Sitchin ended up writing an entire series, roughly 10 or 12 books, examining various aspects with his thesis. And incidentally, in perfect openness, he withered a tremendous attack from academia for daring to come forward with his hypothesis. But in essence, he was saying the human species were created by these visitors originally to be a slave race. These gods, so-called gods, came to Earth to basically mine and take rare earth minerals and other things for their own use. Are you familiar with this whole shtick?
No, that's the first time I've heard that. Was that, who'd you say, Sitchin was his name?
Zecharia Sitchin.
Sitchin.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll tell you, if at the end of the show, if you want, I'll be happy to send all the pertinent information to you.
Yeah,
but this was and I ended up knowing Zecharia incidentally passed away a few years ago, but he had an entire movement behind him. Have you heard of, I'm sure you have, the Planet X controversy?
No. Did he predate, was it Von Daniken?
No.
So they were kind of part of the same.
Well, Von Daniken, his first book, Chariots of the Gods, was pretty good, but then he became somewhat discredited with later stuff. The Sitchin had nothing to do with Von Daniken. Okay. But Sitchin, his work itself is truly an academic triumph, in my opinion. He really did some yeoman work, and today a lot of people have followed in his footsteps, although he's not often always credited with what he did. But this was his thesis, that there were visitors that came here, not necessarily from another star system, but from a planet that is still in the boundaries of our solar system, and a planet that basically makes a pass close to Earth roughly every 3,600 years, with attendant trauma often when it starts to come in close. Now, it is true that, NASA astronomers and many others have been looking for another planet in our system. They call it Planet X, that is believed to be very, very huge. Now, if it might have anything to do with Sitchin's theory, I don't know. That seems to be the suggestion. But the human race was manufactured or genetically tinkered with using early proto-human beings. And you had mentioned that. Now, there are also those that suggest that humanity, Homo sapiens sapien, was planted here. I'm not necessarily saying panspermia, but they were planted here. Now, have you considered the fact that over the decades, and actually, if you get right down to it, the thousands of years that people have been seeing unusual sights and things in the sky, a lot of people have come forward saying these visitors appeared very human, or they could pass as human. What if we are a farm or a transplanted colony here, or something along those lines? Have you taken any of that into consideration?
Yeah, since I published the book, I've heard quite a few different ideas tossed around, and that's one that's come up a few times. The problem, though, if we were farmed, it would have been a very, very old farm, because we can see this long, unbroken chain of progress going back to the very earliest life forms that shared the same RNA initially, DNA later on. So that coding system that we all collectively have among all life forms on this planet, plants, animals, crustaceans, everything, indicates that we are one and the same. We have the same common ancestors going back to those prokaryotes about 3.7 billion years ago. So if they were farming us to be what we are now, they would have had to have started 3.7 billion years ago, because there isn't a point where we just see humans dropped here. We can go back through all of the different hominin species. Obviously, you've mentioned ours, Homo sapiens sapiens, which dates back to about 200,000 years ago. But beyond that, we have Homo rudolfensis, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, all of the Australopithecines, Roarantuganensis. So we have this unbroken chain of humanity, which doesn't really give any indication that at any point we were just kind of dropped here. So if there was evidence for that, if there was some big jump in our evolutionary history, then I could probably subscribe to that. But because we don't see that in the paleoanthropological record, it's kind of harder to get behind that particular idea.
Well, okay, I can certainly appreciate what you just stated. Let's take a look at another aspect to this. Let's say another branch of the same tree. Now, seemingly, and this is somewhat metaphorical, but seemingly, almost overnight, the human physical brain almost doubled in size.
When was that? Because we don't really have any evidence of that either.
Well, we're probably talking somewhere in the vicinity of anywhere from 400,000 or more years ago. We became, I'm not going to say necessarily sentient, but we became antinomically modern humans, seemingly after our distant ancestors discovered eating meat with the added protein and discovering fire. And suddenly, miraculous things began to happen. Now, the one thing my entire life that I've been hearing about when we talk about humanity or the roots of humanity is the so-called missing link. Has that fallen out of favor in academia now?
Well, it hasn't really. Yes, it's fallen out of favor to the point that it's sort of it doesn't exist, and it never really existed. It was just people would try to find places where there was less skeletal and cultural data, and then say, well, there's a missing link there, but it's never been the case.
Okay, well, you know what? Hang on to that thought, because we are going to take our first break. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, Dr. Michael Masters is my guest. This is Dark Matters Radio, and Dark Matters Radio is exclusively a part of KGRA. Stick around. We got a heck of a lot more coming up. We'll be back.
Okay, nurse, let's get this man to the ER stat.
Right away, doctor.
We see this every day. Heart attack or angina pain due to blocked and clogged arteries. Chelation can remove obstructions or blockages from arteries and help avoid painful and expensive surgery. Now there's Angioprim. It's a liquid oral chelation product that you take with juice. You start to feel the results fast. Angioprim increases blood flow all over the body, and that means more energy and strength to take on the day with less aches and pains. 60 years of research has gone into chelation. and Angioprim is the result. A safe and easy way to unblock your veins and arteries from buildup that slows circulation.
Paging Dr. Jones. Please report to the emergency room right away.
Log on now to angioprim.com. That's ANGIOPRIM.com. Or to speak with a trained consultant. Give Angioprim a call at 954-882-7221. That's 954-882-7221.
Folks, this is very important information. What's to be said about CBD? AncientLifeOil.com. Our CBD is made from hemp and has 0.003 THC, which means this wonderful product won't get you high, no matter what amount you take. What does CBD do for the body? My hands are tied, but you can Google CBD benefits and be astounded. When you're finished reading, you'll want to log on to AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com and purchase. Life is good when you feel good. People are tired of pain. People are asking for non-GMO organic products to help them with you fill in the blank. Legal in 49 states, and again, our CBD is made from hemp. Ancient Life Oil is about helping people one by one by one. If you wonder how good the product is, the CEO takes it every day without miss. AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com. Have a great day.
You can tug all day long on a carpet that's been glued to the floor. Then you hurt. There are many strong glues out there. Let's see, there's Liquid Nails and Gorilla Glue. You ever try to remove 3M 5200? That adhesive is strong. Then there's bathroom caulk, silicone rubber, adhesive tape, super glue, flex tape, and stickers, graffiti. Scientists have come up with glues that stay stuck and can't be removed. Until now. Until Handyman Formula by DeBond. That's right. 95% of adhesives become unstuck when you spray Handyman Formula directly on them. Just spray, wait a few minutes, and remove. It's amazing. Most adhesives become unstuck when you use Handyman Formula. Visit DeBondCorporation.com or MCMaster.com. Call 561-575-4200. This stuff really works. Handyman Formula by DeBond, a great Christmas gift.
Mainstream media's most wanted. KGRARadio.com.
And we are back with my special guest tonight, Dr. Michael Masters. Tell me, in all of your research now, and as a matter of fact, just off air, I had a rather colorful description of why I would not want to become a gray just a moment ago. But in all that time, what do you think would in fact happen, which would cause humanity to change to the point where this in fact might happen? You know, the gray caricature of purported ETs or extraterrestrials is universal now. I mean, you talk about flying saucers, the first thing people picture are these little gray guys. Is that necessarily where your thinking has gone? And then I want to ask you about something that I haven't heard anyone mention, some of the problems that in fact could crop up if you are correct with time travel. And I'll just throw this out before we go there to give you some time to think about it, the grandfather paradox. But what do you think, if you're correct, would cause humanity to his physical being change as much as some of these reports would suggest?
Well, I think it's important to point out that it's not just the grays. They obviously have very human-like characteristics. I mean, even basic things like being tetrapods, having 4 limbs, Penadactyly, having 5 digits on each of those 4 limbs. Those are characteristics that go back roughly 400 million years on this planet to the time when we had the first tetrapod. So we share very basic things with them. But then beyond that, they have very hominin traits too, or ones that are characteristic of our specific lineage. Standing upright, I mentioned earlier, having large, specifically rounded heads, which is the trait that defines Homo sapiens sapiens, what's called neurocranial globularity. And going back to what we were talking about before the break, it didn't happen just overnight. If you look at certain things, you can find things that happen more recently, which give the appearance of it happening overnight. But even in Sumeria, we're talking about the rise of civilizations that began with agriculture about 11,000 years ago. And that was really what allowed them the ability to diversify their economies, to have craftspeople, to have politicians, to have an army. All of those things took time to happen. So it wasn't this big eruption that happened 6,000 years ago. We can see all of the transitional periods in between them. Same thing with meat eating. We started eating meat 3.5 million years ago, and you're right, that did give us a big step forward. Leslie Aiello's expensive tissue hypothesis was the first indication of that. We got fire 1.8 million years ago. That gave us a big leap forward of being able to work at night because we had a light source, help cook our food, help protect us from disease. Most importantly, it brought people together so that they could evolve our language. They started to talk and congregate more. So all of these things that led to us becoming more advanced happened over a very long period of time. If we look at the continuation of those, not just our evolutionary physical traits, but our culture, even 100 years ago, people seemed primitive to us. You go back 5,000 years ago, they seemed extremely primitive, even though they were developing these civilizations like Sumeria. Go another 5,000 years in the future, we're likely to look just as primitive as those ancient Sumerians did. So we're not really talking about a very long period of time. These grays could be possibly 8 to 10,000 years into our future, which is a very short period of time, considering the 200,000 years that we've been Homo sapiens sapiens. So I think it's important to kind of focus on these long time periods. But even beyond that, and I just started writing a new book that I hope to have out around this time next year. It's looking at a number of different case studies and the statistics from the FREE study and many other contactee studies that have taken place. And it's important to point out that it's not just these grays. In fact, they found that among the contactees that they surveyed, 48% of them reported human-looking beings, not even grays. The grays were 45% for the short grays and then 33% for the tall grays. So we're not just talking about this quintessential gray alien, but we're talking about real humans with very human forms that people report. And in fact, the first two case studies in the book, they talk about them, they call them men. They refer to them as people. They're exactly the same as us, just with these slightly more derived characteristics that we've been talking about. So I think the main thing to really understand this aspect of the theory is to understand time in the context of our physiological evolution, but also our cultural changes that date back to the earliest stone tools about 3.3 million years ago.
Okay, all right. Now, let me throw a couple of curveballs at you. Are you familiar with the work of Michael Cremo and Dr. Richard L. Thompson and their seminal book?
Rings a bell. I haven't heard. Who is the Thompson fella?
Richard L. Thompson. Their seminal work is a mess. As a matter of fact, I've got it right next to me on my bookshelf, Forbidden Archaeology. And they...
That was Cremo's book, right?
And Thompson.
Oh, they co-wrote it. I see.
Cremo and Thompson. Now, I got that book as soon as it was available back roughly 1993, I believe. And it really set the academic world on fire. They were excoriated because they had a propensity to point out some very inconvenient facts going back literally millions of years. Now, it's pretty much accepted that humanity, as in its present form, is roughly 200,000 years old. If it were, let's say, another 100,000 or so years old, would you dispute that, Michael?
Dispute what?
If humanity was even a bit older than 200,000.
Oh, not at all. I think our Homo sapien sapien designation should go all the way back to Homo erectus.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Because the reason I asked that question is that they have documented some extremely controversial things in their book, Forbidden Archaeology, including extraordinarily human-type footprints dating back several millions of years. Now, is it possible it might have been one of our ancestors? Well, I'm sure it is very possible.
Yeah, those Australopithecus afarensis, those are found in northern Tanzania, I believe.
Right, but I'm talking about here in the United States. For example, down in Texas, and I don't have it in front of me here, but a creek bed was discovered with human-appearing footprints alongside some bipedal dinosaur footprints. Are you familiar with that?
No, that's the first I've heard of that.
Yeah. And I can go rooting through it after the show to show you I'm not full of well, shall we say, blueberry muffins. So But no, there are really some unusual things that have been discovered, including very modern looking types of tools that have been discovered in rock strata going back a very long time, and other odds and ends. OOPArts, they are called, out-of-place things. Now, when academia is confronted with that, and I'm sure you must have encountered it in your research, a lot of times they have a habit, academia, of, without even studying it, dismiss it out of hand. Would you concur?
Well, I think it's important to not really just make broad categories. I think it's a false distinction, a false dichotomy that's oftentimes drawn, where you either have these ways of thinking about things that don't necessarily always go along with the evidence, or you have mainstream academics. I've heard mainstream scientists use a lot, and I really hate that term. I see it on Ancient Aliens all the time. I am a mainstream scientist, and I've been on Ancient Aliens. So I don't think it's fair to create this false distinction where all of us neatly fit into this category of just being dismissive of everything. Many of us have very open minds and do look at what's being presented and do look at it in the context of what we can know through the scientific method. And there is a difference between belief and science. We can believe all kinds of different things, but science works in an evidence-based system. It works with the scientific method. And you can be both. Like the book that I wrote uses a very scientific approach to this question, but also is looking at things that aren't mainstream things. It doesn't fit into our little boxes. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. With that said, yes, you definitely have some tight-ass scientists with sticks up their bums that are going to just instantly write off anything, and not just outside of science. It happens within academia as well, and especially within my field of paleoanthropology. Anytime someone comes out and says, well, this is something different, we think this is happening, instantly they're beat up by everybody else, the old white boys that have been the pioneers of this field over the last 40, 50 years or so. So it happens within academia. It happens across different scientific disciplines. And obviously, it happens between the scientific and UFO community. However, I think if we're going to move forward and make any progress, we need to stop making that false dichotomy and recognize that there are a lot of scientists that are investigating these questions, and there are a lot of ufologists that aren't just coming up with batshit crazy ideas that aren't backed up by anything, and that there's this very strong group of people in the middle who are really trying to figure things out. So So yeah, some people in the past have been dismissed. Was that because their idea had no merit, or was it because academia looked too harshly at it, or some combination of the two? But regardless, if we're going to make progress, I think we need to start recognizing the difference between belief and science, and we need to work together in that area in the middle to be asking questions that don't have very simple answers, but we should still be investigating them, especially as scientists. We should be investigating these questions.
Well, my foray into this field goes back over 3 decades. And I can tell you that 30 years ago, it was much different than it is today. The last couple of years, since roughly 2017, it has opened up a bit. But before that, and Michael, I have squared off with people within the military-industrial complex. I have squared off with PSYCOP. I have squared off with every skeptic in the national arena at one time or another, many times on national television. Now, I had a debate that I debated Dr. Seth Shostak up in the Bay Area probably 20 odd years ago, where we were talking about UFOs. And I've got to say, Seth was always very polite, but he was always very dismissive with my arguments. And basically said that the whole UFO research thing was cultish. And I said, well, what could be more cultish than SETI? Because the bottom line is, since Frank Drake, back in 1958-59, with Project Ozma, how many signals have been detected coming in from the cosmos? Well, with the exception of several inexplicable ones, no one up to this point, maybe the NSA did, but nobody up to this point have been able to point a finger at any obvious deep space signal from a sentient source. And, what's the description of insanity? That's doing the same thing time after time after time, expecting a different result,
Yeah. Oh, I think SETI is an incredible waste of money.
Exactly. Now, I asked Seth, I said, look, 400 years ago, and this was part of my main part of my argument, I said, if we were to leave Europe looking for a shortcut to China, which is basically what Columbus and crew were all about. Okay, and they stumbled over the New World. They actually sailed the wrong way, but they discovered in the New World down in the Caribbean. How long did it take them to get there? Well, weeks and weeks and months, right? Okay, how long does it take us today? Well, we can be there in a couple hours. Well, why is that possible? Do we have a new improved sailing ship? No, we have a new technology where once upon a time we depended upon the wind for power in sailing ships. Now we have airplanes, a whole different gestalt there. And yet you expect extraterrestrials to use radio. I said, even we here on planet Earth, if we could go back in time to the early 1950s, Earth in the radio spectrum would look like one of the brightest stars in the sky. Not today. Why not? Well, a lot of reasons. Number one, we have fiber optic cables. We have lasers that have been used for radio transmission. We have all these different things that are available to us today that we didn't have then. And how long ago was the 50s? In the scheme of things, it was not even an eye blink. Yeah. So, he didn't want to hear that, though, Michael. Right. He didn't want to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't until 1974 that the Arecibo laboratory in Puerto Rico even sent out a signal, sending it to one star cluster, 25,000 light years away. Like,
right.
It's going to take a long time for that to get there, if it gets there at all. There's all kinds of interference.
Unless it's intercepted. Things. Now, what about if it's intercepted? Now, okay, and I've been off and on for the last couple of years. I've been working. I haven't completed it, obviously, but I've been working on why, in fact, we might not have heard anything. Let me bounce this off of you, because I am sure with your field of study, you probably have thought about this. Is there a reason why almost 14 billion years after the so-called Big Bang, just like Enrico Fermi suggested back in the early 50s, well, there's probably got to be ET out there, but where the hell are they?
Yeah.
They're not here, are they? Or maybe they've been here and they left. Well, what if everybody else out there knows of one culture that is xenophobic to the nth degree? And this would be a hell of a hook for a sci-fi movie. They come across emerging civilizations and they wipe them out. They're predatory. Have you ever considered that?
Oh, yeah. I've written about all of those things in the book, the Fermi paradox, the Drake equation, SETI, METI, all of the different things we've tried to do. I actually just watched an interesting movie, a remake of an old movie from the 50s, I think, called The Day the Earth Stood Still, which kind of looks at that same idea of this protector group that tries to wipe out humans because we're destroying a planet that they feel is more important than us. And there's lots of memes, too, that kind of echo what you're saying. I've seen quite a few lately where it's like, well, this is why aliens don't visit us, and it shows a picture of humans doing some stupid ass thing. and then you got, the ones that they're just looking down at us from their spaceships and shaking their heads about any number of things. So yeah, if there are alien civilizations out there, they're not likely to look like us simply because they'd have their own coding system, their own chemistry, distance from their sun, gravity, any number of things.
Unless we're their descendants, or at least in part.
If there was, yeah, I've heard that before too, that maybe humans left and went somewhere else and colonized another planet. I've definitely heard that articulated before. But yeah, no, I think there's a lot of things about the lack of signals that need to be addressed, how we would even recognize it. Like you were saying, would they recognize ours? Is radio technology, this part of the electromagnetic spectrum, just something fleeting that we won't use very much in the future, as we've already been moving away from, at least in the context of just beaming things out into space? Would they even have ears or technology? Would we be able to understand each other's languages? There's a lot of things that need to be taken into account in talking about another civilization somewhere else in a different solar system. The distance between us for traveling, for getting here and there, the time dilation that would take place in traveling between different solar systems at a high rate of speed. So yeah, what I try to do in the book is just bring all of these things together, not completely write off the extraterrestrial hypothesis, but to make note of some important issues and important problems that I feel need to be addressed, and especially in the context of offering an alternative explanation for it.
Okay, now I have a very good friend. We've been friends for, almost 30 years. Dr. John Brandenburg. John is a physicist, and he's a internationally recognized Mars authority, and he's been on Ancient Aliens. Do you know John?
I don't know.
You know who he is, though.
Actually, that's the first I've heard his name too. Brennenberg. I mean, he might look familiar if I saw a picture. I remember faces way better than I remember names.
Sure. Okay. Well, at any rate, a few years ago, John wrote a book titled Life and Death on Mars, The New Mars Synthesis, where he, and incidentally, he has never been disproven with this. As a matter of fact, his conclusions have pretty much been universally accepted. Proved that an artificial nuclear detonation happened on Mars, perhaps twice, roughly 200 odd million years ago. Now, he was able to make that determination because of the discovery of Xenon 129, which is the radioisotopes after a nuclear detonation. And it's all over the Martian environment. And his thesis is this, that at one point, emerging life was apparent on Mars, that they had an emerging civilization that he thinks was maybe somewhere in the vicinity of the equivalent of Bronze Age technology. Somebody came by, discovered that, and nuked them.
That wasn't very nice.
Which was a hell of a thing to do.
Yeah.
Okay. But he believes that that is the explanation for what appear to be on Mars artifacts left behind, like the infamous face on Mars and pyramids in the Cydonia region of Mars and other places. Have you examined any of that? Now, the reason I mention this is that, hey, we have discovered pieces and parts of Mars on planet Earth. And there is one suggestion that perhaps going back several billion years ago, during one of our extinction events, that we may have been seeded by material from Mars.
So the idea is that things came here from Mars?
Yep, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I'd have to look into that claim more. Like I said, this is the first I'd heard of this fella, but he does look familiar. I was just Googling him while you were talking.
Right.
Yeah, no, it'd be interesting to see what he had to say about that, because you'd think we would have a pretty clear indication that something was from the red planet, whether it be its chemical structure, isotopes. We can identify where specific people are just from the water they drank and the chemical isotope differences that they have. So if something was from a different planet, that would certainly show up in any sort of isotope analysis.
Yes. Well, do you recall during the Clinton administration, the infamous meteorite that was discovered down in the Antarctic that was examined and appeared to have fossilized microorganisms in it, which was a Martian meteorite? Do you remember that?
Oh, man. Clinton administration, I was still pretty young and not really paying attention to most things other than booze and women, I guess. It was kind of a long time ago and a rather immature period of my life, I guess you could say. So no, I remember the whole Monica Lewinsky thing. That's about all I took away from the Clinton administration. Oh, he didn't inhale. I remember he didn't inhale. That was the other thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I got you. Well, at any rate, these will give you a few things to examine in your free time.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Yeah. So at any rate, well, I'll tell you, I've been doing this so damn long, Michael, and it's actually part of it is my fault because I instinctively think when I have somebody like you on the show, oh, this guy's going to know what I'm talking about, and you're sitting there and you're not really sure. And I'm sure at one point,
we live in different worlds, but I think they are starting to overlap more, and it's really great to see from my standpoint. And the fact that we can come at this from such different angles and still have insightful conversations about it, I think that's definitely a good thing.
Oh, my mom would love you if she were still around. Oh, Lord. So what is your takeaway? What was your aha moment with your thesis on time travel? Now, I had mentioned the grandfather paradox, and I'm sure you're totally cognizant of what I'm referring to. Yes,
I am. I definitely am very familiar with that. It's a really interesting aspect of time travel.
Yeah, and here's the bottom line. Now, over the years, since the study of unidentified objects have been in the public consciousness, there have purportedly been a number of events where these craft were alleged to have crashed. Of course, the most infamous and famous is the Roswell incident, but there are other ones also. Now, if you're correct, what if we got our hands on one of these things from our distant descendants, and by all accounts we have? And as a matter of fact, I just did a paper not too long ago on one of those very things where there were a couple of very high-profile individuals purportedly discussing this. The one who was a civilian scientist allegedly wrote a memo, which later got to Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And after Mitchell passed on, this made its way into the mainstream, this memo, and there have been a lot of hoopla over it. It's the Eric Davis Thomas Wilson memo. Have you heard about it?
I have heard of that one. I've got one that I can acknowledge as something. I haven't read it, but I have heard a lot of people talking about it in the Twitter UFO community and elsewhere.
Okay, Wilson was the former admiral in charge of the Defense Intelligence Agency in the 90s. And because of a request from, among others, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, one of 6 American astronauts to have been to and back from the moon, and had a deep, abiding interest in the idea of extraterrestrials and ET coming here and technology, etc. He asked Wilson to look into this, and Wilson, according to this memo, discovered allegedly that a aerospace technology giant out here on the West Coast, in fact, had their hands on one of these, working in total blackout and black budget. And Wilson wanted to know what they were doing, and they basically told him he didn't have a need to know. Go peddle your papers elsewhere. Now, bottom line, what if they were to crack that technology, if in fact they have it? Then what? Would that play into the grandfather paradox?
Kind of. I talk about that a lot in the book too. Both the physics.
Seems like I should read your book.
It would probably shed some light on some of these things, but that's why I'm here too. We can just talk about it as well. There's obviously more detail in the book and specific references, but so in chapters 6 and 7, I lay out our understanding of time, the different ways in which we view time, and then also look at how we might achieve backward time travel. And then, as I mentioned at the very start of the show, we have this expression in biology that form follows function that we can see in the morphological characteristics of any organism. Their form is always indicative of their function. But also in physical things, we can look at a car and get the sense that its function is to move us around. Same with chopsticks, forks, wrenches, things like that. But if we look at the physical form of these craft, they fit neatly with what we know would have to take place, at least with our modern understanding of physics, in order to create closed time-like curves, in order to actually allow us to move backward through time in order to visit a period of the past. But then toward the end, which was my favorite part of the book to write, it looks at this very question, as well as a number of other questions related to these seemingly paradoxical situations that would arise if you were to visit the past, the grandfather paradox being one of them. For your listeners who aren't familiar, that's the idea that you go back in time, kill your grandfather before they gave birth to whichever parent it was on that side, thus rendering your existence moot because there was no parent for which could have produced
unless
you.
the timelines split off.
Yeah, and that's the other idea, and that's kind of what I do in the early part of the book to set this up, is look at this the most conventional understanding of time in the context of physics, which is known as block time or landscape time, the block universe, where you have every moment from the beginning of the Big Bang some 15 billion years ago all the way through to the last bit of matter getting sucked into the last black hole and possibly restarting the Big Bang at the beginning of the universe. And all of those moments exist as one massive four-dimensional block. And within that context, if you move in and among this block time, there aren't really paradoxes in the sense that you can change anything. So if you go back in time and visit the past, you're essentially doing what you always would have done. Any change, if you can imagine that, had already manifested itself prior to you even going to visit the past. Everything that you did is self-consistent. You are always going to have done it, and any ramifications of you visiting the past have already manifested itself. So it draws heavily from a Russian physicist named Igor Novikov and the Novikov self-consistency principle specifically, and looks at it in the context of block time, which again is the most conventional understanding of time. As you mentioned, another idea, the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, we could potentially have timelines, different splits take place, a decoherence that takes place in the quantum wave function that creates two separate universes, essentially, where you have one outcome without any interaction and then another outcome with interaction, where psi goes to 0 or 1, and those two outcomes are different universes. And if that's the case, then yeah, we could have all of these different dimensions. And many people talk about interdimensional beings, and that very well could be an aspect of this phenomenon. In essence, it's the same thing as what I'm arguing, just instead of block time, we're talking about the many worlds interpretation. Either way, we're looking at humanoid beings that are more advanced than us and are likely from our future, whether they come from a different timeline or our own self-consistent timeline in the future is something that's going to have to be determined later on. But one of my favorite parts about this question, and this is something you read about in any sort of time travel book on the subject. Paul Davies had a great section in his book about time looking at the same question. Who creates these things? If we got something from the future, whether it be information or an actual craft, and then we reverse engineer it, we didn't create it because it was gifted to us, but our descendants who brought that technology back didn't create it either because we developed it based on that thing that already existed to us in the past. So as long as you're okay with understanding that this exists and this is a real tangible aspect of block time, then there really aren't paradoxes. It comes in us not really thinking about these things and understanding them because we live with linear time. But in the context of cyclic time or these closed time-like loops that can exist that connect different period of times, then really nothing's paradoxical at all. You can have these situations take place and everything remains self-consistent throughout.
Part of my years of research that I've basically devoted to this field. A lot of people think I would have to be out of my mind to do that, but I in fact, for my own purposes, I know this is real, and I'm not going to bore you with my reasoning at this point, but I have dealt with a lot of people in and out of government, a number of scientists that have worked for not only the military, but the intelligence, or have been involved with the intelligence services. Recently, very recently, through another colleague of mine who has been basically beating his head on this military intelligence connection to phenomena. There have been some high-profile people spending a lot of money looking at quantum mechanics and how this basically imposes itself upon phenomena. And of course, what do the military and intelligence people always search for, Michael? New weapons.
Yeah.
Okay. They love things that go bang.
Mm-hmm.
And and I can tell you from my own military service, I was involved in special operations in intelligence when I was in Vietnam. It is a fascinating and also can be a very sickening thing. But with that being said, there are those people today that are looking at some very unusual aspects and how this might all come together for the purposes of trying to figure out what in the hell is actually going on. Now, recently, and when I say recently, I'm talking about the last 20 years, one place in the public consciousness, as a matter of fact, the History Channel has been running something on this now for the last few months, an area in Utah called the Skinwalker Ranch. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yep, that's another one that I have indeed heard of.
Okay, well, there are some very unusual, purportedly some very unusual things that have been happening out there that had the military establishment, the intelligence people, very excited for quite a few years. Billionaire Robert Bigelow, in connection with the armed forces and intelligence people, put together a private organization, NIDS, with some very high-profile people from the science and military involved in this. They were out there roughly, 15 years, I believe. All of their conclusions, everything that they were involved in is still under lock and key. Now, I'm sure that's because of something similar to an NDE from the Pentagon, the non-disclosure agreement. But be that as it may, somebody else bought it. They're out there now. And have been working.
Some Salt Lake City developer, I think, right?
Yes, Brian Flugel, I believe it is.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And as a matter of fact, one of the people out there was an associate of my friend, John Brandenburg. He basically was told by one of the, I'm not going to mention the guy's name because he didn't give me permission to do that, but was irradiated to the point where he suffered some very ill effects. Now, Where did the radiation come from? Nobody apparently knows at this point. But he suffered ill effects, and these things, in fact, do happen. Now, how do you rectify or qualify something like that? We don't normally accept those kind of things without a hell of a lot of proof, but yet they still apparently pop up.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that I am comfortable admitting I just don't know the answer to. And I try to be very honest in the book about separating what we can know from what we can't currently know. That doesn't mean that we won't know at some point in the future, but right now, at our little snapshot of time, we only have the information that's available to us. And there's definitely things like that. Vortexes, consciousness is another one that I feel is kind of ethereal that we're trying to understand, but we just don't have the tools yet to do it. I was on an episode of Ancient Aliens about giant rock out in Southern California. And there's arguably some very strange things happening there too, that we just don't really have the ability to fully understand yet.
Out near where the Integratron is?
Yeah, the episode is about the Integratron specifically. So yeah, I would argue that the Skinwalker Ranch probably also falls into that category where there's just something going on that we can try to understand the best we can with the technology that we have available to us. But, it might be like trying to understand viruses 300 years ago. We just didn't have the knowledge base and the technology with which to do that. So again, in time, we may have that capability. And it's great that people are trying to understand these things. I'm certainly not saying that we should give up because we're not quite there yet, but it might take trying to figure out what these things are that helps us develop that technology and have breakthroughs with understanding consciousness and vortexes and things like that. But yeah, from what I've seen, I haven't studied it in great detail, but from what I've seen of Skinwalker Ranch is pretty interesting. It does seem like there's some anomalous things that happen there.
Let me pop out of this arena into another one. Would you agree that as a species, we humans concerning our past are stupendously ignorant? Would you agree with that?
Humans now?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, God, we're extremely ignorant in so many ways.
Very good. I was hoping.
It's disgusting, actually.
I was hoping you would say that. I'll tell you why. Until a few years ago, no one had a clue, an idea about Göbekli Tepe, a site basically in Turkey from roughly 11,000 years ago that is huge, stupendously huge, put together and built at a time that most of the academic mainstream considered humans to still be basically Stone Age and just out of the caves, or perhaps still in the caves. Now, the reason I mention that, the artwork and the things that are depicted in those megalithic stone columns and what have you, scream to me, Michael, of coming from an advanced civilization. Now, this is just a very short time. I guess this would be on the heels of the Younger Dryas period. A very short time prior to that, the ice sheets were receding, melting, the oceans were raising, and about a year ago, I had an archaeologist on here, and we were discussing that. I mentioned this to you before the show, and when this archaeologist, this lady, was telling me that these waves of people moving through, I suggested that perhaps they were basically fleeing a cataclysm, that they were in fact refugees. And she strongly agreed with me with the suggestion that there was a culture, a very advanced culture, how advanced I couldn't say, that was here prior to whatever catastrophic event happened, which caused the ice sheets to recede, the oceans to rise. I mean, where in the hell were people building then before the ice sheets? I mean, the oceans were a couple of 100 feet lower than they are today. They were probably near the seashores, right? And bodies of water.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly something happened. Something happened, and all of that disappeared in basically a cosmic eye blink. Would you have any heartburn over thinking that there might have been another culture that was destroyed in this event, pre-diluvial?
In that region, you mean? The Göbekli Tepe
in the entire
Turkey
planet
area? That was destroyed
Europe,
entirely?
North America, South America, huh?
Oh, everywhere?
Yeah.
Well, where would we have come from then if all humanity was destroyed?
No, I didn't say all humanity was destroyed.
Oh, just
I
like
said
a major event.
A major catastrophic event.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about an asteroid that there's evidence for that hitting around that time.
Right.
That could definitely enact some changes in that particular region of southeastern Turkey too, where you find Göbekli Tepe. That's smack dab in the middle of the Fertile Crescent, which ran all the way from Palestine up into Turkey through the Tigris and Euphrates River. The Sumerian culture that we were talking about earlier was right through there. So yeah, that was a major thoroughfare throughout that area. You'd expect a lot of people migrating through there, whether they're evacuating, whether they're refugees. It's certainly possible. It was definitely a time when there was a lot of change taking place in that area, much of which, as I mentioned previously, had to do with agriculture and the rise of civilizations that came after. And Göbekli Tepe is one of the most fascinating sites for that reason, because it does predate when we had large groups of people centered around an agricultural area, city-state, as they're called. And it's funny because we always thought that we had to have people reliant on agriculture to diversify our economy, to have different occupations, stratification, where you had some people building big things, public works projects, you had leaders, you had shamans and religious leaders. And then that's when you started to get temples and sites of worship and things like that. But Göbekli Tepe flips that on its head to where you have people coming around this area for whatever reason.
Exactly.
There's a lot of different reasons why that could have potentially taken place. But they centered around that site for worship. And then a civilization grew based on the archaeological evidence that we started to see all of those generalized characteristics of a civilization, a population over 10,000, stratification in the workforce, public works projects, and then it happened in the opposite way. So it's a really fascinating site, not just for that reason, but many others, and especially because of the religious aspects. What was it about that place at that time that was so fundamental to the people of that region that they collectively built this thing even without the benefits of agriculture? It's a really interesting site.
Well, yes, and there's another site there in that general vicinity that is even mentioned in the Bible, the Judeo-Christian Bible, that is dated back at least 9,000 years ago, which is roughly 3,000 years older than Sumeria, although it comes on the heels of Göbekli Tepe. The city of Jericho you very seldom ever hear anybody talk about Jericho, but yet there it was. How do you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, it's same sort of thing, just places sort of popping up where they could. We look at these places now, the Nile River Valley, Mesopotamia, the southeastern Turkey area, even throughout Palestine and Jordan, you have these places that look just tremendously inhospitable. But 12,000 years ago, when things were really getting going, it was a very different environment. It was a lush, green environment where you had ample water, fertile soil because of the fluvial plains where the river would dump all of its nutrients. So, yeah, we could actually see how places like Jericho and Catalhoyuk, Göbekli Tepe, how they would just kind of spring up in places where they could, just because of the abundance of resources that were available to them.
All of those sites, of course, are extraordinarily mysterious, even now, even with all the research that has been conducted on them. But there is one culture that I find and have my entire life to be of intense interest, and that is the land of Egypt. Now, Egypt is one of those areas that did not spring out of the ether like Sumeria did. But I've always thought that had there have been a pre-diluvial civilization, and I personally think there was, that the people leaving the catastrophic event, whatever that was, might have found the fertile areas along the Nile River and the Nile Valley, and civilization began there. Now, what are your conclusions? Because during this period of time also, and we would be remiss if we didn't mention this, Michael, the Sahara Desert was not the desert going back 5,000 or 6,000 years. It was a vast grassy plain that something happened, the climate changed, and suddenly we have what we have today. There might have been a lot of settlements and even cities in that vast area. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I know we got a break coming up, so I'll keep it short. But the six major places where civilizations arose were in places where agriculture developed largely around rivers, the Indus River, the Yangtze in China, the Nile River, mentioned the Tigris and Euphrates. And then even in the Americas, the Teotihuacan Valley of Mexico, where Mexico City is now, is just a dry, desolate area. But back then, yeah, it was very conducive to agriculture and civilizations forming. So, yeah, pretty much any place it could around that time. And it's interesting because there's almost like a collective consciousness there that humans just reached this point where we realized we could take control of the environment and change it to suit our needs rather than changing us to suit the environments. And that's one of the most monumental shifts in human history.
Absolutely. Okay, now we are at the break, and when we come back, I want to ask you about what is currently North America, because we have our own share of mysteries. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight my very special guest, Dr. Michael Masters, and we still have a heck of a lot coming up. Stick around. We'll be back after these words.
Hey, this check is wrong. I worked a holiday and 7 hours of overtime. Not getting paid correctly is a real pain. It could also hurt our boss if our company provides out-of-compliance checks. That's right, construction companies doing business with the government can get fined, or officials of the companies can go to jail if the checks aren't right. It's a law. The Davis-Bacon Act has 30 compliance issues for every check, but there is an easy way for construction companies to be in compliance. EMARS offers Compliant Client, a web-based system that finds and corrects all 30 of the possible out-of-compliance check issues. Users of Compliant Client report an 80% savings in time and money. Running a weekly payroll usually takes about 5 minutes. All 15,000 plus clients of EMARS have never had a legal compliance issue. Plus, they sleep better on check day. Contact EMARS at emarsinc.com or call 480-595-0466.
Ew, yuck. They're unhealthy and gross. Bugs, I hate bugs. We keep a clean home, but occasionally bugs show up. Well, I found something that is tougher than bugs. Orange Guard. From contact, it kills bugs. Plus, Orange Guard kills hidden bugs and keeps new bugs away for weeks. I know. I use Orange Guard. Plus, all of the ingredients of Orange Guard are on the FDA generally regarded as safe list. Orange Guard may be used around food, humans, and pets. It promotes a healthier planet, and here's a bonus. Orange Guard cleans where it's sprayed. Plus, it comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Orange Guard.
You can get Orange Guard at Ace Hardware. And listen, folks, Orange Guard is tougher than bugs, and it's safe to use. Go to orangeguard.com. That's orangeguard.com.
Hey, is that a new music app?
Yeah, check it out. Surfer Music Discovery. It links to thousands of online stations, but the twist is you see the song names and artists that are now playing live.
That's different. No guessing. Looks like a waterfall of music.
So many formats. Rock, oldies, country, R&B, jazz, and a whole lot more.
How's that spelled?
Surfer. S-U-R-F-R.
Is it expensive?
It's free. No need to sign up or sign in.
Get the Surfer Music app free from Google Play or the App Store.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now. The Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Now you have the inside contact for alternative talk radio. The Planet. KGRAradio.com.
And we are back with my very special guest, Dr. Michael Masters. Michael, by the way, this would be a good time for you to tell everybody where they can get your book.
Well, it's available pretty much anywhere online. Amazon, obviously, Barnes & Noble. There's also an audiobook on Audible and iTunes, which can be downloaded. An ebook.
What about Kindle? Is it available on Kindle?
Yeah, it is indeed. There's a link to that on Amazon as well. There's links to all of those on my website and other information about all of the upcoming talks that are now canceled or postponed, which I guess is kind of irrelevant at this point. But
well, you teaching, okay? You are a college professor. How has this, excuse me, COVID-19 business? How has this affected your school?
Well, I mean, being in a rural mountainous area of Montana, I'd say it's been a lot better than many places. And in my county, we've only had 13 cases this entire time. And that was back in March. So it peaked and then fell pretty early. But we obviously went to all online distance learning. And that was difficult. Canceled a big conference where I was going to present some research in Los Angeles, the American Association of Physical Anthropologists meeting. And that's always the big conference in our field, so it's kind of a bummer that went by the wayside too. It's just, I can't complain too much. We still have our health and a lot of places to go, things to do. I've been camping and fishing a lot. So really, I other than some pretty big events being canceled, it's really not been too bad. Definitely better than being in a little apartment in a giant metropolitan city, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. Well, my wife and I live in a fairly rural area here in the San Fernando Valley. And one thing I have noticed, especially since, the People's Republic of California have basically had us locked down for the most part, but wildlife has blossomed around here, even more so than normal. Yeah. Now, in years past, I've had bears around here, deer, of course. At one point, I had a mountain lion on my back wall looking for a dog dinner. Yeah. And I'm not kidding about that. I mean, But yesterday, in the early morning, we have two small dogs. I have my little cocker, Miss Jade. She's my special baby. And then there's Joey the knucklehead, who's kind of a shelty dog and sweet, but oh my God, he's exasperating. And they're both out back, and suddenly, if you're a dog owner, you can tell when something is not right.
Yeah, definitely.
And yeah, the noise, the bark that they make. And suddenly I heard this frantic barking from both the dogs outside. And my wife popped her head out we have a sliding door from the backyard that leads into our bedroom. And she stuck her head out as I'm going out the back door. There was a coyote that had come into the yard, and he's on the bank right above. We have like a retaining wall there. And it's the first time we've been here now 25, 26 years at this location. And first time I've ever seen that before. And I got to tell you, man, it really made my heart leap up.
Yeah.
Because
they'll eat your dogs too.
I know they will. I know they will. And of course, that would lead to bad things, but if you know what I mean. But I don't, I'm not used to that, even though I probably should be, but that was a real wake-up call.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely know what you mean. I've run into two bears while out hunting in the fall time, and just this last year, and it's a little nerve-wracking. You hear wolves and coyotes all the time too, but it's good, I think, to be reminded of nature too, and not just completely buffer ourselves from it. I think it's healthy.
Oh, Michael, there was a time when I lived literally in a hole in the ground, and I am not a hobbit, okay? And I'm talking about living for a long stretch of time, and I'm referring to the military, but
yeah.
Actually living in a hole in the ground. So it's, I know about nature. Oh,
you know, it's hard to get any closer to nature than that, really.
Yeah. Yeah. We used to have rats, big rats come into the bunkers, and that was because I wasn't used to vermin like that, not where I came from, but oh well.
Yeah, they get big, that's for sure.
Yep, live and learn. So if you had the ability to utilize, this may sound like an off the wall crazy question, but to utilize a time transference device, where would you want to go to take a look?
I think I would probably want to hover around the various sites where I've worked. There's a few here in Southwest Montana, Native American sites that date to about 5,000-6,000 years ago. I think I mentioned earlier that I worked at a Neanderthal site in southern France called...
I was going to ask you about that, yes.
Yeah, Chépinot-à-Jonzac, which is a really fascinating site. They were there about 150,000 years ago, all the way up until Homo sapiens came into that area and replaced them about 35,000 years ago. And then I worked at another site in South Africa called Makapansgat, which was a 3.5 million year old site, which predates culture. It's right before we started to make stone tools. And I think, you get to know those groups really well, holding their skulls or looking at all of the different types of tools they made with the more recent ones. So I think it would be really insightful and kind of exciting too, just to hover up in the sky and watch what they're doing and see how they lived their lives in real time, because we're piecing together their life ways, what we can know about them from the material culture they left behind. But there's really no way to know about their belief system or the intricacies of their social organization. So I think it would be really fun just to kind of pop into those time periods and those places and have a look.
Well, you mentioned Neanderthal. Okay. Most people today, and I mean, if you call somebody a Neanderthal, you're basically insulting them, because that suggests that you're an uncultured, stupid, ignorant creature. And that's unfortunately how many people feel, because they basically are ignorant. They know no better about the Neanderthals. But all of us, Homo sapiens sapiens, at least here in the West and in Europe, we all have a little percentage of Neanderthal in us, don't we?
Yeah, upwards of 5% in some Southeast Asian countries.
Okay, so apparently Homo sapiens sapiens and Neanderthals would occasionally get together, right? The Neanderthals actually had, by all accounts that I've read, and I've done reading on them, they were much more sophisticated than we thought, weren't they?
They were, yeah. I mean, they were really well adapted to their environment in the time that they lived there. We came into the region about 40,000 years ago, and we did have slightly more advanced tool technology. And what was also important is that we had larger group sizes, so we had strength in numbers. And we outcompeted them for the same resources that they used in that environment, and also killed them, most likely based on how fast they went extinct. But yeah, as you mentioned, we also did the nasty and the pasty, and we made babies with them, and some of their DNA is still in us. And anyone outside of Africa has about 2 to 5% Neanderthal DNA. So we carried it with us, even though they don't exist alongside us as another Homo sapien subspecies. We definitely still have a little bit of them carried with us into the future.
What were the major differences between our species and Neanderthal?
They, morphologically, they had what's known as a supraorbital torus, a large brow ridge. They had more of a sloping forehead, where ours is characterized as having a more vertical frontal bone and neurocranial globularity, as I mentioned earlier in the show. The main trait, in addition to that defines anatomically modern humans, is a mental eminence, or a chin, where our midfacial anatomy and our teeth have shrunk back. They've recessed and retracted to the extent that we now have this little pointy chin, which you don't see in any other hominin species other than us. As far as culture, they were pretty similar. They had fire, they made and used stone tools. We now know they did cave paintings. It used to be thought that only Homo sapiens did cave paintings in that region and elsewhere, but some were discovered that predate Homo sapiens coming into that region just a couple years ago, indicating they were definitely made by Neanderthals. So yeah, they had art, they had culture, they had language. They were very similar to us. They definitely looked brutish, and I think that's where a lot of
they were much more robust than we are.
They were. Not? Yeah, they were cold adapted. Both their craniofacial anatomy to warm the air as it entered their face, and their body structure was very much robust to help with the cold weather. And yeah, that would sort of add to that too. And we also just didn't know much about them. When the skull was discovered, I think it was the 1850s or 60s in the Neander Valley of Germany, compared to a modern human, they looked really primitive. So we just kind of came up with this narrative that turns out wasn't necessarily true, but it's only been corrected in the last 10 years or so.
They apparently also had language, did they not?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's very good indications. They're not just their vocal structures, their vocal anatomy, but also the same parts of the brain, largely vernix and Broca's area, that give us language. They had that. So, yeah, language doesn't preserve. We can't dig up a fossil and hear what they said, but we can definitely infer from their anatomy that they had language.
You know, my first real basically introduction to Neanderthal was years ago. I'm trying to remember now, a teenager. I was in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian, and there was a diorama there with two Neanderthals which were burying a third one. And I'll never forget when I went in and I looked at that. I got such an indescribable feeling of sadness. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, I've actually been to that site. The name escapes me right now. It's a French site in the Dordogne Valley. It was about an hour from where we were working in Jonzac, and we went there one day during the weekend and toured around.
They buried their dead, in other words.
Yeah, they were the first ones to do that, absolutely. They had grave goods. There's pollen all around it. They definitely put flowers in the grave, just as we do. They were in a flexed position is the only difference. It's kind of a fetal position, whereas Homo sapiens laid out, they're dead. But yeah, it indicates that they had a much deeper sense of cognition and afterlife.
Spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely. A spirituality that we, again, previously thought was just something that we had. And now we know that it's something that they very much had as well. And that's something that's evident from the archaeological record in that region.
Okay, so you're up in Bigfoot country. Okay, dare I say it?
I think it's safe to say, especially if you go a little farther west into Oregon, Idaho. But yeah, we've had some sightings.
Yeah, two questions. Number one, first and foremost, do you believe that there is something there? And depending upon your answer, question number two, do you think it might be one of our distant ancestors or something else?
I'm kind of on the fence with that one. But to reference an earlier part of our conversation, this false dichotomy between mainstream science and fringe science or whatever. When I was in grad school, we actually had a professor of biological anthropology come and give a talk about Bigfoot and what evidence there is or how we might understand it based on evolutionary anatomy in the hominin lineage and among hominoids beyond ourselves. And it was widely accepted. Nobody really batted an eye or said anything weird. So it's something that we have been talking about. We do discuss it. For me, it's hard for me to really get on board because outside of some footprints, we don't have any definitive skeletal remains. And
not skeletal, but hair and feces have been collected.
Yeah, and the skeletal thing, I've heard the argument that, well, we don't find bear skeletons in the woods, but we know bears exist. But we do find bear skeletons in the woods. They're just fewer and far between because there's not as many bears as there are elk and deer and rabbits and things like that. So it's a sampling error issue. But the other thing for me is that because humans are so inquisitive, you would think that these beings with our same general physical characteristics and likely a similar intellect would also be curious as to who we are and what we're doing, especially if they notice that we look similar to they do, just with less hair. They'd expect them to kind of pop out or even come into our towns. I mean, bears do that, canids do that, coyotes, wolves, and all of these other intelligent creatures. Dolphins, fundamentally different than us, but also intelligent, and still come follow our boats and come up to us on shoreline. So I don't discount it. I'm not against the idea of a Bigfoot or the reality of it, but for me, they stand as two big issues. Where's the skeletal evidence? Even if we don't have, a tranquilized one in a cage, we should still expect to see their bones. And if they are like us, you'd think they're intelligent and that they would be checking us out as much as we're trying to check them out.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and you can give me your feelings about it. I don't even know if you will be familiar with this guy, but I in the past, a number of years ago, I did interview him, a guy by the name of David Paulides. He has written a series of books called Missing 411, which talk about inexplicable disappearances of people, everything from children to full adults, even hunters, adults that were armed with high-powered rifles, primarily in federal areas, or national parks, that type of thing. Now, the underlying suggestion in many of these cases, and he hates to say it, but I happen to know that's what he thinks, attributes a lot of these to encountering these creatures, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call them. Now, this may seem off kilter, off the wall, Michael, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, I actually have heard of him. He was kind of doing the circuit over the last few years and a number of interviews and speaking engagements. So, yeah, I've come across his work. I didn't know about the Sasquatch connection. I thought it was more of a UFO abduction explanation. That's I don't know. That's interesting. Is the idea that Bigfoot like kidnapped people, or?
Well, who knows? Yeah, they're somehow involved, but incidentally, whether you're aware of this or not, I am. There have been many accounts where Sasquatch or Bigfoot, or at least a type of Bigfoot, because there are two varieties, one with 5 toes, I don't know if you're aware of this, and one with 3 toes. And the 3-toed variety are usually connected somehow with the sightings of UFOs or UAPs. I don't know if you were aware of that.
Yeah, that's kind of a recent development, isn't it?
No. It goes back quite a few years.
The 3-toed specifically.
Yeah, I was aware when I came back from the Army, when I first became a uniformed police officer. My department, this is back in Pennsylvania, okay, my department had a situation happen before I came on board where a woman was literally run off the road driving down a country lane by what she claimed was a UFO. Now, that fascinated me, so I started doing a lot of research, and I came across a case that happened across the border in Ohio, where a Ohio farm woman was in her kitchen one day. Her husband was at work. He had a job and also farmed, but he was off at work. She's doing the dishes, looks out the back window, sees a Bigfoot creature approaching her farmhouse. And this was an area where there had been some at the time, recent UFO sightings.
Yeah.
The thing stepped up on her porch. She, like many people at the time, they had firearms there, had a shotgun next to the back door. She grabbed it, stepped out on the porch. This thing started approaching her. She shot it, and the report stated it blew up in a flash of light and was gone. Now, take that for what it's worth.
Yeah,
but,
that's cool.
That was the story.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was under the impression that it was somewhat controversial to associate Bigfoot with UFOs until recently. I feel like I've heard people say that. So is that not the case? Am I wrong?
Not in my experience, and I go back quite a bit.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wonder why that is. Yeah, no, that's kind of cool. I definitely think there's a connection from what I've seen, and close to where I live called Redgate, outside of Deer Lodge, and a buddy of mine captured a really strange image on one of his trail cams. He's a hunting guide, and he also works on the ranch, and it's an area with a tremendous amount of UFO activity going all the way back to the 50s and 60s. So, and I think that's pretty characteristic of many of them. So, who knows what that means? Are they messing with us? Is it some sort of experiment? Who knows? I'd love to ask them that question.
Yeah, well, you're not the only one. You're not the only one. Well, look, now, as far as your speaking engagements, have you received any indication when a lot of these restrictions may be lifted? Do you have any down the road, so to speak, a bit that you think you still may make before the year is out?
I mean, really, until we have a vaccine, I don't see how any concert or large public gathering is going to happen. But who knows? I'm hopeful that they do. I was supposed to give a talk and a workshop at Contact in the Desert just a few weeks ago. I know that got postponed till next year, so should still be there. I was supposed to give a talk for the Southern Coalition of UAP Studies down in Huntsville, Alabama last week, but I think they're either postponing that or doing it digitally. And I just got invited yesterday to give a talk at a similar type of scientific UFO group in Florence, Italy, which I'm pretty pissed about the COVID situation because I love Florence and would have loved to have gone back there, but they're doing theirs fully online. So, and I think they're making it publicly available for free too, so people will still be able to check that out, and there'll be a question and answer session afterwards that's live. So that's still happening. I think people are just trying to adapt and use technology as much as possible. But I just got that invite yesterday, so it's not up on the website yet. But yeah, I'll just keep people posted through the website and the email list that I have going. There's also a link to that through the website. So.
Well, I was the end of last year elected to the board of directors for our association here where I live in the San Fernando Valley. And right after, our first meeting is when this thing hit. And we've now been having all of our meetings on Zoom. So, yay, technology,
Yay, technology, until it means you don't get to go to Florence, Italy anymore, which I'm still a little salty about, I guess.
I hear that. Well, Michael, hey, man, this has been great.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
We are out of time. First, allow me to thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I would love to have you come back if you are so inclined. And hey, I am definitely going to download your Kindle version onto my Kindle device, I want to read that, man. I really do.
Awesome. Yeah, it's available in all three formats. So whichever is your favorite. I prefer the audio books, but I definitely appreciate a good ebook too. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
Well, thank you so much. Please keep in touch. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for tonight. And we will be back this coming week. In the meantime, keep your eyes pointed up, keep your ear to the ground just to get a handle on what's happening, and we'll see you then. Good night.